Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Jim Tincher. I am the CEO and founder at Heart of the Customer and author of the book Do B2B Better. And I'm excited today to invite Courtney Warford to join us from AGCO. Courtney, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it, Jim. So I'm Courtney Warford. I lead customer experience at AGCO Corporation. Been in this space for about 3 years with AGCO, and prior to that, I had about 15 years at Cargill.
All right, we'll hear more about Courtney here in a minute as we talk about really how do you create an operational game changer from customer experience. I've known Courtney for a few years now and love the work she's doing. I had her present to a group of other CX change makers. They loved what she had to say, and so I asked her to join us today. Now, before we get into Courtney's experience, which is where we'll spend the majority of the day today, I'm going to just talk about a little bit about context here. And so we're going to talk a little bit here, just when we talk about CX's operational game changer, where this fits in. Now, as many of you know, this is the year we're really focusing on increasing your maturity. And we use a version of the XM maturity model. I say a version because I don't really care for the way they name it. I've renamed some of the things, but the concept's exactly the same. This fits under activating the organization. It's one of the harder areas because it means that it's not your team. It's involving the rest of the organization to think about the customer experience and to act against it. How do we activate them? And really, when we look at what this means, is that it ensures the organization has the skills, support, and motivation to achieve desired results. Change management is a critical skill here because you have to create an environment where the rest of the organization feels like they have skin in the game to create a better customer experience, and that will help them be more successful. Now, when we see groups who are less mature, which, face it, is most of them, they lack the motivation for driving a CX program. They often see a CX program as more about a survey outcome. Maybe they pay attention around bonus time because they're bonused on it, but they don't really understand or care how their role impacts customer experience. And this is where we see frustrated CX leaders because they're not having the impact. A change maker, such as Courtney, in their organization, senior leadership is involved in driving a culture of customer experience. They embed customer centricity in everything they do, not just from an annual bonus, but they understand that when the customer experience gets better, well, customers will spend more with you, stay longer, and interact in ways less expensive to serve. But that's enough about the context here. I really want to hop into hearing from Courtney the work she's doing at AGCO. So, Courtney, let's start with telling me a little bit about yourself. You mentioned you've been in this space for 3 years. You've not always been a customer experience person. Tell me more about your background.
Right. Well, much of my career has been focused around supply chain and business development roles with a big dash of strategy and transformation work in there. And so while I don't have a typical background as someone working in customer experience, my experience and expertise is truly starting with the customer and working back into an organization to structure a supply chain, the processes, the way that we should be working to deliver to customers and measure their success. And so it was a very natural transition for me to move into customer experience. And when AGCO had reached out about this opportunity that they had, I jumped at the opportunity to really hone in and help an organization focus on the customer.
So while you haven't been a CX person more than 3 years, you've always been customer focused, it sounds like.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I grew up in an area, I grew up the first part of my career where I really cultivated the beginnings of my career was in a part of Cargill that was truly focused on the customer, and they had won business excellence awards for that effort. And so it became very natural to think that way, that it wasn't just around let's make sure that we can make shipments on time and on time and in full, and that the invoice is correct, but it's really around what does that do to the overall impact in a commodity type market that price was actually, we were the higher price leader. So what did you differentiate on was service. And so with that mindset around, it doesn't matter what you sell, that was the key point of why our customers chose us day in and day out. And so that became ingrained in how I think as a leader, but then also too how I think about business.
Excellent. Hey, I'm going to ask for more background from her, but in the meantime, if you have questions for Courtney, you want to react to, do the chat here in LinkedIn Live. We're delayed by about a minute, so I may not respond right away, but I can see your comments. So feel free to put any questions you have for Courtney there, and I'll relay it to her as we go. So I'm guessing a lot of our more urban attendees, I live in North Minneapolis, less familiar with AGCO as a brand. So can you tell us a little bit more about AGCO?
Yeah, so a lot of people don't know who AGCO is, but they're actually a Fortune 300 farm equipment manufacturer. So it's a multi-brand company which has a global scope. They make equipment like tractors and combines, but they also have invested in our building innovative technologies to make farming easier and more efficient. They have about 23,000, 25,000 employees and do about 15 billion in revenue a year. So, relatively a decent sized corporation.
So, as mentioned, been there 3 years. Next week, I'm going to be at the CXPA Leaders Advance. Hey, I hope many people here will be there as well. And I'm going to be talking about really that first year, about how to set up your CX program for success. We did 33 interviews of CX leaders. Of course, you were one of them. Thank you. And I want to go back to your first year. Now, of course, the theme about today is creating CX as an operational game changer. But that's not something you just turn on. It takes building that foundation. So tell me a little bit about how you started your work, AGCO CX program, and how you were able to build on that foundation.
No, it's a great question. So a little bit of history. So prior to when I started in AGCO, they were going through a CEO transition. And so from the CEO that the former CEO to the current CEO, there was a new strategy that was developed all around how to we achieve some goals by 2025. Now, a cornerstone of that strategy was getting closer to understanding farmer needs and transitioning from a product-oriented company into one that was really closer to the farmer. And you would think that's kind of natural being in the agriculture space, but it can definitely be a little bit of keeping up with the Joneses in terms of technology. What are the offerings? Especially when you're going after large scale production agriculture, bigger is often better. So it's really product focused and doing everything you can to get products out to farmers. So they wanted to switch the mindset. And one of the key parts of that strategy was creating a streamlined organization, which included standing up customer experience. And so it was really a challenge. I came in with a blank sheet of paper, and the first year was really spent around change management, communication, establishing fundamental metrics like Net Promoter Score through a globally harmonized survey, which is also quite challenging. We had asked feedback in some of the regions, but not necessarily in the same way. So I would say much of the first 18 months was really spent educating leaders in their teams about customer experience and not only how their work touches the farmer, but why it matters to the farmer's success. And so it was really around, it's not, we're going to do this customer experience thing. It was, if we're going to be more farmer centric, if we are truly going to, want to understand and learn more from our customers and really change our entire organization to thinking about farmers day in and day out in our decision making, we had to make that a part of our culture. And we had to have people understand what customer experience was. Why do they matter? How do they fit and why do they matter to that? If you're an accountant, how does your work impact the farmer? If you're in IT or HR, how do you impact the farmer? So really it was all around the first 18 months was connecting with leaders day in and day out, educating people, going across the world and talking about customer experience and really bringing CX outside of the CX organization. So it was really a unique place to step into as well. But I think one of the really interesting things too, as we got started, was I had to train my team on the same thing. So we had, my team originally was open headcounts plus some employees that were generously, contributed to our cause. They came from all areas of the organization. We had some people from IT, some people from sales, some people from engineering who didn't know anything about customer experience. And really, that's how you and I met, right? So I had bought the book, How Hard Is It to Be Your Customer, for my team. And you helped my team to, with your very great approach that you have at Heart of Customer, to help them understand the customer journey and how to build one. It was a lot better for you guys to explain it than for me to educate my team on that. But I think, that's a lot of what it was. And so taking that time to educate and connect in and talk about farmer first as a part of our culture and tying that to customer experience was the foundation that we needed to be able to move forward.
And that was a lot of fun. I remember that well here in Minneapolis, actually a Dyna get together. But I want to go back to that first year, because what I've heard from a lot of folks is I know I need to talk to my business stakeholders, but who? A lot of them out there. I know you earned more than a few frequent flyer miles that first year. You're still continuing to do that.
Yeah.
Talk to me about, who did you go out and visit? Where did you spend your time?
Yeah, well, it really started from the top down, and not at I didn't start there. It was, I wanted to understand from a senior leadership standpoint, so the CEO's team, and I reported into that area of the organization. So I wanted to know what they thought about customer experience. What were they thinking about this farmer first thing? What were they thinking about our strategy? And what was their ideas on how it would be brought to life? So what does success look like for them? The reason I started with them is the first thing I wanted to know is the leadership all aligned, and do they have the same expectations of my team? Because if I started to run out and build something and it wasn't aligned to their expectations, or maybe they had a different perspective of what customer experience was, I wouldn't be setting myself up for success. So I started there, and then I asked, had the courage to ask each one of them and say, I would like to be in front of your teams across the world and explain this new area of the organization and what we're looking to enable. And so everything that was related to customer experience, the organization, was all around, this team is here to enable our growth aspirations and support you to better understand our farmers so we can help you do what you do best. And that was the framework that we started with. But because I had asked that, I started to quickly build a network, and I would, set up time, like who are the key stakeholders that I need to know across the organization. And then my peers were able to help open some doors on, oh, you need to talk to the guy who's leading IT, the digital area that's looking at, things that are going on inside of our customer quoting system. You need to talk with them. Oh, the parts team, here are the key people in parts. And so I was also very fortunate where I had some fantastic enablers within the organization that help open doors. And every time I had a meeting with somebody and met somebody new, I asked them for their help to say, who should I be talking to? Who can I connect with? Especially as I started to find the people who were champions of this work, I leveraged them heavily and leaned on them hard. Where, to your point, a lot of frequent flyer miles and a lot of Swiss chocolate was going out to people across the world, thanking them for helping me along the way. So luckily, I had some really great support, a support network that helped me to get that going. But a lot of it was just making sure I was talking to anybody and everybody about this work.
So I want to push a little bit more on that,
Yeah.
because anybody and everybody, okay, you have more than 10 employees, you have 1 billion of them. I'm sure a Courtney in another world was talking to the second assistant parts ordering person. I don't think that's who you were talking to. So to be more specific, like, what are we talking about from levels and roles? Who were you talking to in the first 30 days? And then who did you reach out to as a result of those?
Yeah. So in the first 30 days, I reached out to the CEO's first line, and then the heads of manufacturing, quality, parts, the distribution networks, and everything that I didn't know about manufacturing. And you know, it was a new industry for me. When I say manufacturing, agriculture equipment manufacturing. So that was my first place. Now, the other thing that I did is I went on a tour of our, when I say tour, a world tour, but I went to our sites, our facilities. I visited dealerships around there. I needed to know what the experience was for our farmers. And so in the first about 30, 45 days, I went and visited our major distribution network dealers here in North America. I visited the big ones that were in some of our European areas. But the people that I was speaking with, it varied depending on the context of what the conversation was. So one of the big things that I didn't skip out on was the lower levels of the organization and that middle level, because those are the people who do the work. Those are the people who understand what happens. And so I wanted a piece of context. So every time I would walk through one of our manufacturing facilities, I would ask questions of the parts clerk, of the people on the line. Tell me what your biggest thing is. You know, what do you know about our farmers? You know, what do you know about the work? So I wanted to get a perspective of how the organization felt, because if you only are working at the top part of the organization, you might be missing out and there might be a disconnect between the two. So to answer, you know, very plainly, I worked down in terms of one-on-one coffee conversations and introductions from the executive to the VP to the director level. And then the every time I visited a place, I made sure I left time for a fireside chat with the employees at a location.
And we didn't talk about this when we were prepping, but so hopefully you'll go along with me on this. So when I was with Best Buy, for example, the merchants were the rulers of the world. They were where, if you wanted something done, you had to go to them. When I was with United Health Group, it was product. They owned the P&L. Everything had to be done there. When I look at our manufacturing clients, they vary. Sometimes it's sales, sometimes it's product, sometimes it's manufacturing. Who are the rules of the world at AGCO? Who really, where's that power?
So it's typically the brand. So it's a multi-brand company. So our commercial arms have a lot of influence in the organization. Additionally, because we are a B2B2C business, very similar to the car industry, where you don't necessarily buy directly from Toyota, you buy through a dealership. You had to make sure that you understood the ins and outs of the people actually creating the experience. So both from a distribution network and parts organization network, as well as the commercial teams, that typically is where I spent a lot of my time, because they're the ones creating the experiences. And of course, from the brands, I had to understand what were the brand promises we were looking to achieve so we can measure whether or not we were doing that in the eyes of our customers. So I would say we spent, each of our manufacturing sites have brands seated there. So every time I would learn more about AGCO, you're typically connecting in with those groups.
Okay, that's helpful. And obviously you go to market differently in different countries. So that's where a lot of the frequent flyer miles came in. You know, I'm sure the farmers in Germany have some things in common with the US, but I'm sure there's quite a few differences. So how did you learn about those nuances in your customers, the farmers?
Originally, it was first before I traveled anywhere. One of the first places I started was the agronomy team. So these are the basically farm scientists. We have a team that is really looking around technologies about farmers and how do we improve net farm income and increase efficiency. They're a great source of, you know, of knowledge, information, and passion about the farmers. And so I started there to learn where are those key areas of difference that I needed to learn and needed to understand. So especially being somebody who is here in North America, it was I knew some about North America farming. And when I was lived in Asia for 4 years for Cargill, in the poultry industry, I knew a lot about Asia and Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific, and agriculture there. So what I wanted to learn was what's the difference in Europe, and how do, you know, customers choose a brand in Europe, there are so many of them. And it comes to, the fact that it's very different in France versus Germany versus Italy versus the UK. And so learning those nuances, I started with the agronomy team and then went heavily into the commercial teams to travel with salespeople and go to our dealers and understand and really get hands-on and learning about the farmers. So I spent the first probably 60 to 90 days learning about farmers and getting in front of as many as I could in as many different locations as possible to understand their challenges.
And for those not familiar with the term, the commercial organization, I see it primarily in manufacturing. It's typically sales, marketing, customer service. Is that the same there?
Yeah, so it would be sales and sales, marketing, and customer service is a little different, looks a little different in our organization because we're a B2B2C, but it's predominantly the sales and marketing organizations.
Okay. And where do you report up to?
So I report into an area called customer success. And so this area is my part of the organization, which is customer experience. There also is our entire parts organization and after sales organization. So for for tractors, you need to have parts, and so that reports in, as well as our customer support. So this is all of the technicians. And so if you think about it from a car dealership, car manufacturer standpoint, the people who are at the dealerships who fix cars, they need to learn and understand who to go to when they can't fix a car or they don't know how to fix, or there's a new model and they need to be trained on how to fix it, or even to do an oil change. So that group is called customer support in AGCO, and so that area reports in, as well as our distribution and dealership partnership management is there. And I'm missing one other area as well that off the top of my head I can't. Of course, product management and brand management. So under one group, it's very much focused on these functions that all support the customer. Our product portfolio, it's much the P's of marketing.
Okay. Let's go back to the farmer. As you mentioned, you're a B2B2C organization. And in a lot of B2B2C organizations, you can have some real battles over who's the real customer.
Mm-hmm.
We do a lot of work in life insurance, and we have two competitors that we work with that I'm thinking specifically of that are in the same town. And one of them, the customer, is the independent agent or advisor. The other one is the end consumer. And they're both crystal clear on who the customer is. It's just different for each one. Sounds like you don't have any conflict over who the real customer is.
Oh, there always was. So when I started, I would ask that question across AGCO and get a different answer. And
Okay.
what was nice is that the executive team was all aligned on who the customer was. And some people would say, well, we have two customers. We have our dealer and the customer. And I said, well, okay. And then if you ask different groups within AGCO who were supporting, they would say, well, my customer, is IT, or my customer is finance. So you can see where it dilutes the power of what that definition is. And so what we had said, and the CEO was okay with this. I said, hey, every time we talk about customer, let's change it to farmer. And let's make sure that you're telling everybody, our customer is the farmer. It's who we make our machines for. Now, doesn't mean that we need to ignore the experience that our dealers and distributors are having. It's a key piece of how to make this successful, right? So if they're not happy, if they're not enabled, if they are not set up for success, we can't create the experiences we need for farmers. And so you'll see I will, in this chat that we're having, I'm doing my best to say customer all the time. I'm so trained to say farmer. So that way it's crystal clear who we serve and what our purpose is.
And that language matters.
Absolutely. You need something for people to connect to. What is their purpose? It can't just be, well, we want to have a customer experience organization and have a high net promoter score. It's around, we want to be obsessed with farmers, understand what they need, and do the things within our organization to make that happen. And it instills pride in people's work, and it really helps to connect the employee experience to the customer experience strongly and with more kind of fervor because they know who they're there to serve and they have a noble purpose versus just saying this faceless customer.
So we just had a question from Maxine wondering, how do you relate the employee experience to that customer experience? Great question. I'd love to hear more about that. So first of all, I just want to say for those here, it's very interesting to me that every customer experience person I've met cares about the employee experience, but only about 1 out of 10, from what I can tell, that's not a hard number, actually have any kind of ownership over employee experience. So I'd like to ask you now, Courtney, is what's your level of interest and what's your level of influence over the employee experience?
Yeah, it's actually quite a lot. So when we got started in standing up the customer experience organization, it was May of 2021. I had to do my math there. So 2021. It wasn't announced that we were going to be stood up until the end of 21. So we had some time to learn and grow and figure out and stand up the measurement, et cetera. So employee experience wasn't stood up in our in the organization, and they had just launched their first engagement survey. So it was clear that there was some, and they had just hired a new CHRO who started the same day as me, so the chief human resource officer. So when her and I started, and we were both in the office together, I stopped by and I said, "Hey, coming from where you come from, what was your, do you have any experience with connecting the customer experience to employees?" And she goes, "I don't, but I've been reading a lot about this, and tell me more." So from the very beginning, I had the ear and the connection with the chief HR officer, and they ended up standing up a employee experience team.
Excellent.
And as we were developing our new cultural values, farmer first became a culture value. So anything related to farmer first, I have ownership of, though it is connected to our employee experience and culture work. So I don't have ownership of the employee experience, but heavily involved in that employee experience and anything related to how do we become more farmer first as an organization.
All right.
Does that help? I feel like I diluted that answer, but it's really strong because with us, we couldn't. You can't create the experience without the employees. Having that North Star, and those employees, whether they're frontline or not, need to understand how they fit and why they matter. If you can imagine a salesperson going to a dealership and saying, "Oh, we got to do this customer experience thing. Tell your customers to respond to the survey, or you just respond to the survey. Who cares?" If they didn't have that tie that value to it and understand why it mattered, then you have an army of people who just think it's a check the box activity for our organization. So one of the key things that we did as well is we included in the employee engagement survey questions very specific to farmer first and what does that mean. And so do our internal processes enable you to be farmer first? Are you proud to work for this company? Do you feel our leaders are living up to farmer first? So we ask a lot of these questions, which help us to understand and engage. Where do we need to improve internally with our employees to make sure that they feel that we are hitting the expectations of what farmer first means to them?
We often we work with a client, we will do a survey of their employees, and we'll ask questions like, how do you feel your company is the customer experience? But some also is, do you know how your company measures the customer experience? Do you know what those scores are? And then the most critical one is, do you know your role in the customer experience?
Yeah.
Some of them it's very easy. If you're a salesperson, customer service person, and you don't know that, well, then I can't help you with that if that's the case. But if you're finance, if you're operations, it's more difficult often to connect yourself to the end customer. There's a linkage, but it's a little bit harder. The name of this is, of course, building an operational game changer through CX. Can you talk a little bit more about how do you merge the operation of the organization and customer experience work together?
Yeah. To your last point that you just had, One of the key things that we did is that we stood up, along with the team, a strong practice around change management and culture. So as a part of our group and the educational processes, we created e-learnings about customer experience and launched those in 26 languages. We're working with dealers and doing the same thing. So, and connecting it to already contextualized things that AGCO has been talking about. So saying, hey, we did some sales training for you earlier. Let's tie that back to, what that means to the customer experience. And so we have done a series of e-learnings, and they're continuing. So my team has 5 e-learnings that will launch yet in the coming months, 2 of them next month, that are helping people to get deeper in their knowledge about things like the inner loop and outer loop and what is journey mapping, to make it more tangible for them on what does this customer experience organization do and why is it important for our farmers. Now, to the topic of around operationalizing, I think the other piece in terms of our employees as well as our leaders, asking them to care about customer experience, you'll get a different response, right? If you need data and you need to go to the organization and say, hey, I'd really like data on the sales for the last 5 years at a different product level, and get all these different details that you might need to be able to gain some insights. It's not everyone's always on board at the beginning. And so what we started to do is, with the data that we had, which wasn't perfect, and the NPS original surveys that we had coming in the first year, we had 26,000 responses, which we thought was really fantastic in our first year. Now we're over 50,000 a year, 3 years later. So, and we're on pace to even outdo that. So we had data. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't, the mass quantity of what you'd want to, it wasn't the coverage that we'd like to see, but we had a starting place. And what we had found when you started to peel back the layers a little bit is we had some fundamental basics that we weren't getting right. And so what in turn, and then I realized we needed to talk about things in a simple way that resonated with the organization, that people could say it was memorable, and everybody could get behind it because they could understand how they fit into it. And so we came up with the AGCO Fundamental 4. And this was all around doing the basics consistently every time at a high level.
Just so, before you go into them,
yeah.
I want everybody out there to grab a pen and paper, because I immediately said, well, we need to be talking about this with all of our clients. This is really good. So I want to call everybody's attention. If you're multitasking, stop multitasking, because this is fabulous. Okay, go ahead, Courtney.
Sure. So, and that's high praise. Thank you, Jim. So the Fundamental 4 was a framework that was everything related to the farmer, and how can we or our dealers connect to it. And so the 4 are: get the machine ready for the customer, right? So if you are sitting in quality, if you are sitting in manufacturing, if you're in engineering, what are you doing and how does your work get that machine ready for the customer? And so I'll use farmer, right? Get the machine ready for the farmer and ensure farmer success. So are we putting out high quality machines that enable farmer success? So get the product ready for the farmer. The second one was get the farmer ready for the machine. And so that is around, what are our dealers doing to ensure that the customer understands what they're buying, what it can do, what efficiencies does that drive? How do we make sure that we have the right how-to videos available, the right marketing materials talking about this? How do we enable the dealers to ensure that that customer is successful and that they are ready to use the machine? How are we supporting demos? How are we collecting customer master data the right way? How do we ensure that our customer is set up for success? So not only do they have a great product, but now they are able to be enabled with a really good support process for them. The next one is follow up frequently. It seems really, really rudimentary, but follow up. If you're the dealer, follow up with the customer to make sure that they feel supported and valued. For our internal teams, when you hear feedback coming from a dealer, follow up promptly to make sure they have the support that they need. If you have an inquiry from somebody internally within AGCO, follow up to make sure they have what they need and that you didn't just chuck the, hot potato over the fence. Following up, in terms of after service, after repair. So these kinds of things were really important from both a dealer to the farmer, but from AGCO to the dealer, and also internally within our teams. And then the fourth one is fix issues fast. Now, everybody in our organization could resonate, especially with that one. So how do we fix issues fast? How do we fix our processes? How do we fix issues for the dealer? How do we make sure that our time to fix for our dealers internally when it came to engineering and things was timely? How do we make sure there's a sense of urgency around what we do? So we landed on those 4 key principles, and anybody in our organization could say, I can figure out where I connect into one or all 4 of those, no matter where they sat in the organization. Now, what's great about the fundamental 4 too, I should say additionally, is that we could tie each of the fundamental 4 to a net promoter score impact. So I knew that when a farmer, received a machine that was free of defects and ready to use, that cohort of farmers had an NPS score that was 30 points higher than farmers who did not. Now, that's powerful. So if we're trying to improve net promoter score, and we had a task, we still have a task, to improve our baseline 2021 net promoter score by 25%.
Wow.
So we had a huge, and the entire organization is charged with that, not just customer experience. I mean, that's a big number. So 30 points, like not 30%, 30 points, NPS points higher. We also knew that a simple follow-up phone call after the sale has a NPS impact of 25 points. We also had found out that after service, so when the machine was serviced, and in particular, a major repair, the impact of that follow-up phone call was 40 points of NPS. And it was all around, how do we make sure our customers feel valued and supported, right? And so because we could measure these things, because we asked those questions in our survey, it just wasn't about, would you recommend? It was, hey, tell us a little bit about your sales experience and delivery experience. Tell us a little bit about your service and repair experience. Not, 87 questions. Give me the ones that matter, right? Knowing that these are hot spots in the customer journey where we can make or break the relationship. So with all that said, this framework really resonated with the organization and has become a mantra for how do we ensure that we are focusing on the right things for the right reasons. And so behind that, operationally, we now have some global large-scale initiatives that are addressing each one of those. So whether you're the manufacturing plant, engineering, our sales and marketing organizations, our dealers, our internal processes, there are several large-scale big initiatives that are supporting the work that we need to do to move the needle on the fundamental 4. So
I got to share, I kind of hinted this earlier for all of our viewers out there. So I've talked in the past that we have this program called the CX Fellowship. More our clients that are a little bit more advanced, and so they get together 3 times a year to learn from each other. Courtney was unable to join this year with her travel schedule. She couldn't commit to it. So I said, okay, let me do the next best thing and have her talk to the fellowship. And she presented this, and when she did the foundational 4, wait a minute, let me write this down. And so one of our clients in the industrial real estate space couldn't attend. I called her right away and said, this fundamental 4, it applies in this very different space the same. So are you okay if everybody here steals the fundamental 4 from you?
Please do. Please do. We need an army of people who care about customer experience, right? And if you can take a little nugget of what we've done, I think this one's a great one, because change the words, a little bit and tweak it for your industry, your business, whatever it might be. But even if you have a digital product, how do you make sure that you have a great high quality product going out? How do you make sure your customer knows what they're buying and how to use it? And then how do you make sure that you have a good follow-up mechanism and resolve issues as they pop up? It's pretty elementary, but it becomes really powerful when you can measure it, especially.
Well, and just for a reminder for everybody here, the four are, get the product ready for the customer. And so when I look at our client that, again, they're basically a landlord to industrial companies, well, you get the property ready so that it's ready for when the client comes in. Next, get the client or customer ready for the product so they know what to expect, what the policies are. In this very different space, it applies 100%. Follow up frequently. In our case, for there, it's like when they move into the property, when they have issues, you follow up frequently there and then fix issues fast. Yes, you probably want to tweak it a little bit, but really feel like this is fundamental to almost any customer experience. And especially, as you said, when you add in measurement, now it's a lot easier to build into operations because it gives you, instead of we want to improve net promoter score. Great. I can come up with 73,000 ways of doing that. But now we have a framework of 4 items which to focus. So did you just sit there one day at a bar and come up with these 4, or where'd they come from?
A strong collaboration of, adult beverages and some experience. No, I think it was, between, myself and a couple of other leaders, we sat down and said, hey, I'm thinking about pulling together just a quick framework of how do we talk about this and how do I equip you as a leader to be able to talk about customer experience and what your teams can do there. And I think the other piece was, how can I not just operationalize customer experience, but how can I tie the business outcomes to what matters for the farmers, right? So if our aspiration is to grow by X%, how do we do that? By tying customer retention and some of these activities we need to do in getting our products ready and our customers ready to those outcomes. How do we start tracking time to fix and differently, or start to look at our product campaigns and tying that to experience? How do we look at all of the different metrics that are leading up through engineering? Are there any of those that we can tie to ultimately, is our product ready from a quality standpoint? Are there any leading indicators even before we get to where we need to be that we could drive a farmer first focus into certain metrics that are already measured within the organization? And so some of those are happening today. Some of those are ongoing. A great example is service retention for a company like ours. So when you're working through a distribution dealer network, it's not as widespread as for the car industry, where there might be 5 or 6 Toyota dealerships within a metropolitan area. We have a situation where if you are serviced in one place, that you don't have necessarily a lot of overlap between our dealers. And so they typically have predetermined territory. So your choices are a little bit more limited unless you're switching to a whole nother brand. And so for us, we don't want to just ensure that our customers are having great outcomes at the beginning of the relationship when they get the machine, but how do we build that loyalty throughout the life cycle of that machine and understand the services that they're requiring to make that happen? Do they turn in the machine every 3 years, every 5 years, every 15 to 20 years? And then customers, depending on what their behaviors are, need different things. Do they have a very simple machine that they can fix on their own? Or do they have a highly high technology, highly digital connected machine where we can use that data coming off the machine to help with proactive and predictive analytics for them to know when they're going to have an issue and start to connect repairs and service to what might be happening operationally on their machine? So some of these things we are starting to leverage a strong data and analytics capability within AGCO to do, and others are already there and stood up. So a lot of what we're trying to measure right now is internally connecting metrics, but now we need to also work with our dealers to look at things like service retention, overall customer churn, and things like this.
Well, that touches into a question Mike had, who he asked, are you able to tie NPS from the foundational four to those business outcomes, repeat revenue, cost to serve? So sounds like a yes.
We can, absolutely, and we'll continue to do more. I think being a B2B2C, having all the data that a normal B2C business might have, or even B2B business about your customers, is a little bit more challenging for us. So sometimes it's directional with the data that we have, and sometimes, or an indication of what it is, and others we have hard and fast numbers that can tie out, which is pretty significant.
You talked earlier about growth as a goal. I love this data I read from Gartner, which when they asked CEOs to name their top initiatives, the customer came at ninth. Now, we've seen that the customer experience was important. Well, not when you come down to it. What they said was number one from a CEO perspective was growth. That's what most CEOs are interested in. And so you need to tie our metrics, NPS, customer reference score, whatever that is, into growth. And you've talked a little bit about that. I recognize that the data is not always clean. Nobody has clean data. So
Right.
how are you able to make that connection?
So I actually got this question this morning. I had the opportunity to speak at a town hall about customer experience in the organization, and this question came up. So it's, what is the customer experience organization doing to help fill the sales funnel? And so I said it's two, and it came from the commercial side of the business, so the sales or after sales part of the business. And my answer was, it's actually twofold. So if we want to increase market share, customer experience helps in two major ways. One piece of it, if you think of your business and as a bucket, and your customers as water, and you're trying to fill the bucket with water, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to have holes in the bucket, which is your customer churn. Customer experience and the practice helps to patch the holes in the bucket, so we can keep the customers, as many customers as we can that we have, right? And so that part of the retention helps to grow market share, because you're not churning your customers in the way that you normally would, because you're able to keep those loyal customers, those customers loyal, I should say. The other piece of it is from a strong customer master data practice, from understanding the customer journey leading up to purchase. You can, as well as some market research, you can also pinpoint what are the reasons for the dropout out of the funnel. And so what are the key things that you need to do to either make the experience stronger when they're going into the funnel itself? How do you work with marketing to get awareness and then start to track things like cost for acquisition, tying that to, did we actually win that? How much money did we spend to win them? And were we effective in the whatever campaign we had used to try to snag that customer and bring them through the funnel? And so I think for me, a strong part of what I do on a regular basis is to connect business outcomes to what initiatives we need to run that impact our farmers. And this is, that's where you go, where you can start to measure and show the value, shows the organization that there's a value to not just focusing in on the customer, but having some expertise in what the experience is, which personally for my organization has helped to get investment of more headcount building expertise in customer experience, because we've been able to demonstrate the value and impact to the bottom line and top line and everything in the middle for focusing on the customer.
And there's actually research to back that up. I remember in the AMA journal, they have a report which showed that when customer satisfaction gets higher, cost of sales drops. And that's often because you know more about your customers. As you build customer experience, you know more about them, therefore you can market more effectively. It also typically means you're building a more effective marketing process because you're applying the skills of customer experience to it.
Yeah. So it was funny. We were talking about the cohort. One of the questions that came through, and I had thrown out a random number on customer retention. And so we had a situation where, and I can't remember, let's just say it was 75% customer retention was the number that was thrown out. And so they're like, well, 75% retention is pretty good. And I said, well, it depends on how you think about it. Because if you think about 75% retention, it sounds really good on paper, because a lot of companies have less than 50% retention, sometimes less than 30% retention, right? depending on what your product is. But for me, the way I think about it is you're losing 1 out of every 4 customers.
Right.
So when you gather 4 customers, 1 of them is running out the back door. And my pitch originally to the sales and marketing teams was, how can I help you make sure that that back door is closed and that we don't have any customers sneaking out the back to go to one of our competitors? Because that's, for me, the difference in between talking about a customer experience metric like customer retention and tying it to what that actually means for the business. And so it really means that 1 in 4 customers is leaving if you have a 75% retention. And so maybe it looks great on paper, but in actuality, we got some work to do, right?
Yeah, I love that answer. That was great. So Chris asked, he said, exciting work, Courtney. Are you tying the NPS survey to other surveys in addition to tying it to engagement and transactions?
Yeah, so typically our NPS surveys, our team is still on a maturity journey. So we do some relational surveying. We also do some transactional surveying. With every NPS survey, we ask, hey, would you be willing to answer some other questions? Now, farmers are a little bit different than if you're getting one from a hotel chain or when you're traveling, any of the different NPS emails that we get. But the surveys that we ask them, different questions about experience. We also might ask questions related to sustainability. There's times when we do market research, we might tie in some of the NPS related type questions to that. But that's where we are looking at the survey questions from that standpoint. From the outcomes of the survey, there's quite a lot that we're tying and will continue to as we can pull in and connect operational data to customer data. There's some really interesting use cases, especially as we're leveraging generative AI internally around how do we start to understand survey retention is one big piece of it, but then what are the outcomes over time for these customers? So how do I connect the number of times they went in for service, the number of warranty claims they had, the number of parts that they have purchased, to what is their NPS score along that? What was the fill rate of parts at the dealership over the counter, right? So then you can start to really drill down and connect some of these things where if this happens, did this happen? So did the experience created happen because of a sequence of events that ended up triggering this experience for the customer? So then you can get really detailed on what might be some of the drivers that are in the process to support the customer and the experience that you can pinpoint and connect. So I could talk about that data analysis all day. You can tell I'm excited about it, but I'm trying to hold back a little bit, Jim.
Well, I could talk all day as well. I hope everybody's catching that, because that's when we look at the change makers. One of the things that's always different from that 1 in 4 who could prove that CX was driving the business forward was that they connected it to that data the business cared about. Things like fill rates. I mean, that's when you can show that. My guess is when fill rates are low, then NPS goes down because your farmers are frustrated because they can't get it fixed as quickly because products are in back order. As a result, we look at repeat purchase, probably drops as a result long term, and you build this chain. And so we could spend the whole time on that. Unfortunately, we only have a couple minutes left here. So I want to just bring back to, I love your story. I love what you're doing. And to me, the reason I wanted you to be here today is you're a great example of a change maker. Somebody who's connecting it, who's really showing that the business thrives through a better customer experience. This is going to sound like a segue, but it's going somewhere. Last month, earlier this month, we talked about 4 different organizational designs. And I'll be speaking to this at the CXPA Leaders Advanced next week. And yours fits squarely in the centralized, where you have one team, as opposed to, you're definitely not small, because you've got many more than 2 people, 3 people. You're not federated, you're not distributed, you're one central team, which I describe as a high risk, high reward approach. High risk, that's a high head count, but by having a large central team, you have a diverse set of skill sets you can apply to different issues. You recently got some new head count. That suggests to me you're really driving change. Talk to me about what's been happening with your team.
Yeah. So we had, as I mentioned earlier, we inherited a great team of people, or a partial team of people that were from different areas of the business. One of the big strengths there was that they brought the business knowledge to to my organization. The downside was is that they didn't necessarily have the tools to be able to know how to do customer experience. So as we started to show, and at the same time, we went through an organizational structure change. So a bunch of my open headcount were closed that I had coming into the organization. So the team that I had was the team that I was able to keep. And so we started with the basics, and we started to put foundation stones down. And then the organization, the senior leadership especially, started to say, well, we want more. How can we do this? You ran a fantastic workshop on the delivery experience and uncovered 65 things that we need to fix. How can we do more, and how can we go faster? And how can we start to generate more value out of this? And so with that, we were able to continually ask for, okay, it would be great if I could get a journey team that could help map out the journey and really understand our farmers. And so at first they were like, oh, okay, well, Courtney, I mean, what does that expertise look like? Can you just take somebody who's from engineering? And I said, no, we really need to invest in the skills and capabilities in customer experience, which sometimes are hard to find. And so little by little, it took some convincing over the last 3 years, but I have quite a team that has expertise coming from multiple industries, both internal in AGCO, but mostly external, that are really hyper-focused in customer experience. So we've created a powerhouse capability for AGCO, which was one of our strategy levers. So I think as we have been able to show the value that we can create and have some wins in patching some of those holes in the bucket, and have the leaders within the organization see the value and what it's doing for their teams and getting our dealers where they need to be, they've been helping to sell the value of customer experience. And so some of that legwork of being everywhere, all over the world, all at once, starting a few years ago, it really has paid off.
And how many more people were you able to add to your
So
team?
we added seven headcount, and so we added 3 journey design people, and 3 people only focused on outer loop. And then we also have been able to put in 2 leaders to help make that happen and organize the team.
So that right there is the size of mini CX teams. That's your additive group. So I love that. It shows really that you are a change maker creating impact. And I really appreciate that.
Thank you,
Courtney,
Jim.
thank you so much for coming here, sharing with the team. Can people reach out to LinkedIn? Is that the best way to tell you how much rock star you are?
Hardly a rock star, but definitely rock solid. So if anybody would like to reach out, please do knock on my door. I love this stuff. I love continuous improvement. I love doing things for customers' sake, and would absolutely love to be connected with you if you are interested. And I would like to learn from all of you.
Right, right. So this is Jim Tincher again. I'm wrapping up. If you want to talk more about how to accelerate your program, how to create a more mature organization, and how to drive business impact, Jim at heartofthecustomer.com. Love to talk to you about it. And with that, we will bid adieu to this month's webinar, and we'll see you back next month.